Hello! Welcome to this blog where I'm going to be talking about life after AAT. So this will be of interest to any AAT students who are considering whether they may want to move on to other qualifications once they've completed level 4. One of the great things about AAT is it does give you a route into a variety of other potential professional qualifications which you can use to improve your career, to improve your earning prospects, and to improve your understanding of the way accountancy and finance works. Well, my name is Gareth. I'm a managing director with First Intuition, one of the UK's premier accountancy colleges. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. You've got my email address there, garethjohn@fi.co.uk, and I'm quite active on Twitter, so you're more than welcome to follow me at AAT Top Tutor. I answer a lot of AAT related queries. I sometimes post various blogs to online lectures that I do on different technical areas, but you're more than welcome to get in touch if you want to ask me anything. The idea of this blog is to just give you an introduction for some of the professional qualifications that you might be able to move on to after AAT, and this is just a bit of an overview of the various qualifications I'm going to chat through. I hope you can understand I'm going to give a fairly shallow overview of the various qualifications. I will give you details of where you can go if you need any more detail about the different qualifications, but this will just give you a flavour for what's out there really. And we can almost break it down into two major categories. You've got accountancy qualifications, very much following on from what you see in AAT. AAT obviously covers a wide variety of both financial accounting and management accounting subjects. So you see things like accounts prep and financial statements at levels 3 and 4, which is on the financial accounting side. You then get the likes of costs and revenues and the budgeting and financial performance papers. They're more on the management accounting side. And the AAT does give a broad overview of a variety of different accounting skills that are used in finance. I'm also going to talk briefly about some of the specific tax qualifications. Sometimes when students do level 4, particularly if they do the optional tax papers, business tax and personal tax, they might develop a real interest and a real love for the tax system and want to pursue that in a more specific way. So thinking about the different accounting qualifications, well, you can almost break it down into two types of accounting qualification. There are those that are followed in industry, or commerce, as it's sometimes referred to. Now, when we talk about industry, we typically mean maybe people who work in the finance department of a large business, or somebody who works in the finance department of Green King the brewer, for instance. They will typically pursue accounting qualifications. We've then got accountancy qualifications that are more used in practice. So it's actually being used in accountancy firms, so perhaps the likes of Deloitte. Again, their staff will pursue certain accounting qualifications. Now, you tend to find different qualifications normally suit either industry or practice. For instance, the CIMA qualification, which is very much a management accounting qualification, that tends to be pursued by people working in industry, so maybe working, as we've said, in the finance department of a large business. Also can be pursued in the public sector. Sometimes get students maybe working for the NHS who pursue CIMA. On the practice side, you get the likes of chartered accountancy, ICAEW, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, and the vast majority of students pursuing chartered accountancy would probably work within practice for an accountancy firm. So CIMA tends to be more industry orientated, chartered accountancy tends to be more practice orientated. You might then notice I've got ACCA, which is the certified accountants. They actually tend to sit in both categories. You do often get ACCA students who work in industry. For instance, I've trained myself ACCA students from the likes of British Sugar. So again, they work in the finance department of a large business, but ACCA is also very common in practice. So I've trained ACCA students from Deloitte and other accountancy firms. So ACCA to some degree sits in both camps. Now, what you'll typically find is that CIMA, Chartered and ACCA are probably the most common accountancy qualifications in terms of the number of students who train for them. But there are a couple of other accountancy qualifications worth being aware of. There's ICAS, which is the Scottish Chartered Institute. Now, as the name might suggest, they are predominantly followed in Scotland, but over the last decade or so, there have been a number of students in England and Wales who've also been pursuing the ICAS qualification, a very well-regarded, prestigious chartered qualification. And you then get CIPFA, which is the public finance qualification. That's typically followed by people working in the public sector. So again, if you work in the NHS, CIPFA may be of relevance to that environment, or if you work for a local council, for instance. So that's a bit of an overview. I'm going to talk in more detail about each qualification shortly. That's a bit of an overview of the major accountancy qualifications you might come across. In terms of the tax qualifications, well, there's a couple to be aware of. There's ATT, which is a kind of lower level tax technician qualification, and often students who do AAT may then progress on to do ATT, and you've then got CTA. Now, CTA is a much higher level tax qualification, and in fact, of all the qualifications on this screen, CTA is arguably the most challenging. Most students who go through CTA will tell you that they're probably the most tough exams that they've ever sat, but sometimes students might, once they've done ATT, might then progress on to CTA, go up to the higher level qualifications. Whilst it's a challenging qualification, you can imagine that that means not so many people do it, and so that can massively increase your attractiveness to employers. It can lead you to much higher level careers and obviously much higher earning potential. So that's a bit of an overview of the accountancy and tax qualifications I'm going to be chatting about over the next 10 minutes or so. So let's start looking at them in a bit more detail. Well, let's start with the qualification we said was quite prevalent in industry or in commerce, so the kind of thing that somebody working in the finance department of a large business like British Sugar or Green King might be pursuing. Let's think about CIMA, or the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants. Well, CIMA, as the name might suggest, is dealing primarily with management accountants, which is why it tends to be more common within industry. Most people who work in practice would typically be working more with the financial accounts side of the business, either as a bookkeeper or helping produce accounts or even as an auditor. But in industry, you tend to find management accountants will be doing a lot of the work. And because it's more of a management accounting qualification, one of the things CIMA say about their qualification is it combines not just finance, but also business. So there's a real focus on business, giving you more than just accounting knowledge. So whilst you will cover debits and credits and the way accounts work, you look much beyond the accounting of an organisation, look at the way the business will operate, trains you in things like business management, business strategy and risk management. And in fact, a lot of people who train for CIMA, much as it is an accounting qualification, they may then move out of purely an accounting role in their organisation, become more involved in general financial management, for instance, even into more general management. So as we've said, predominantly studied by employees in either industry or sometimes in the public sector. I see a lot of students, for instance, from the NHS who study CIMA as a good all-round qualification that will help them not just in the public sector environment, but if they were to then move on into the private sector. Now, in terms of becoming a CIMA qualified accountant, basically it's two things you need to do, and this is very typical of most of the institutes. You need to pass some exams, which we'll talk about shortly, but you also need to get a certain amount of work experience, and for CIMA you need 3 years or 36 months worth of relevant work experience, and it's something that you do need to do when you're applying for membership of CIMA, as well as proving that you've passed all the exams. You would need to document your 36 months of experience to show that you've done the various relevant things they're requiring. One thing that is worth being aware is if you have already been working in a finance function while you're doing your AAT, they do allow you to count that time towards your CIMA qualification. So in fact, you could potentially already have the 36 months worth of experience, as long as it's in the appropriate areas, and you can get details of that from CIMA in terms of what exactly you would need. But it is feasible that even by the time you finish AAT level 4, you might already have got your 36 months worth of experience. tends to be unlikely, to be honest, because often when students are working through their AAT, they're at quite a low level in an organisation and probably wouldn't be filling all of the categories that CIMA look for, but it is potentially theoretical, but you certainly might be able to count 12 months or so towards it. Now, as I said, I'm going to give you a sort of broad overview of the qualifications, just give you a little bit of a taster. If you want a little bit more information, you can obviously go to the institutes themselves. So I've just noticed a slight little typo here. You don't need the dash, actually. So if you want to find out more about CIMA, you can go to www.cimaglobal, no dash, all one word, .com/study with us. But it's worth going on to CIMA's website anyway. You can browse around. There's lots of information on there for prospective students that you can have a look at. Now, I would like to talk a little bit about the CIMA exam structure. So let's just think, and it's worth being aware, I'm actually recording this in May of 2014. It's worth being aware there is a fairly major CIMA syllabus change happening at the beginning of 2015. So for the current period up until the end of this year, we're still on the old syllabus, but there will be a change of syllabus for the beginning of 2015, although it's really a change in the way the subjects are examined more than the actual subjects themselves. But let's just think briefly about how it currently works under the old syllabus. So basically, there are 5 levels of exams you work through. There's the certificate level, which is 5 computer-based assessments, actually fairly similar to what you will have seen through AAT, kind of multiple choice, fill in blanks and the like. You've then got the kind of proper paper-based exams, which starts at the operational level with 3 paper-based exams. You then have the management level, another 3 paper-based exams, then the strategic level, which is another 3 paper-based exams, so 3 sets of 3. And then once you've done the strategic level, there's a final case study exam called T4. Now, the way the system currently works is the exams are currently held in May and November each year. This is for the paper-based exams, so unfortunately it doesn't have the same flexibility as a computer-based exam when you can effectively do it when you want. But these paper-based exams currently held in May and November each year. The good news if you've come through AAT is, assuming you've finished it all off and completed level 4, you will get exemptions from the certificate level. So in fact you won't need to worry about that first 5 papers, so you'd be able to go straight into the operational level. So in fact, I have a lot of level 4 students who are completing their level 4 in the next month or 2. They'll be hopefully completing this summer, and they may well be interested in looking at some of the operational papers in November of this year, maybe get 1 or 2 of them done at the end of this year, even before this change in syllabus. Now, in terms of how long it would typically take a student to work through CIMA, well, if you're an AAT qualified student, you get your exemption from the certificate level. To work through the rest, probably looking at a couple of years. Also, it depends on how quickly you pass exams and whether you fail any exams and have to resit. And needless to say, you will find the CIMA exams more challenging perhaps than the AAT exams, so don't be too worried if you have the odd failure along the way. It's very, very rare students get through the entire CIMA exam system without tripping up on something. That's why it's a prestigious qualification, because it's a tough qualification. But I would suggest that maybe a couple of years would be appropriate under the current syllabus. However, if you are starting CIMA currently, then you're not going to have that 2 years under the current syllabus, because as of the beginning of 2015, there is going to be the new syllabus introduced. Now, the basic structure is not terribly different. You still get the certificate level, which as far as is currently available, you will still get the exemption from, but that's worth double checking with new syllabuses. But as far as is currently available, that will still be the exemption. So you still then have the operational level, the management level and the strategic level. So very similar. They've each got 3 subjects, but the big difference now is they're moving away from paper-based exams towards computer-based exams. So in fact, at each level, you have 3 computer-based exams, 1 for each of the 3 subjects, and then a multidisciplinary case study, which actually pulls together all of the papers in one case study. Now you can see that's true of the operational, the management, and the strategic level. And the thing about the computer-based exams is they are going to be on demand. So in fact, it does give the opportunities for students to get through things an awful lot quicker. The case study papers are sat 4 times a year, basically every 3 months. So if a student was highly motivated and wanted to get through as fast as possible, they could actually potentially get through all of the CIMA exams in as little as 9 months. That would be a lot of work to do, and I suspect a lot of students will take a little bit longer than that, perhaps more like 12 months or 18 months, but it is going to be possible to get through the CIMA qualification an awful lot quicker. Okay, so that's thinking about CIMA. Again, if you want any more detail, best place to go is to the CIMA's website. There's lots of information on there. Let's now think about ACCA, or the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants. And in fact, ACCA is often referred to as the Certified Accountancy Body. Now, this probably more than any of the other institutes is perhaps the most global body. ACCA has got the most members and the most students around the whole world. The qualification is recognised by key regulatory and educational authorities all around the entire world, whereas things like CIMA and Chartered are perhaps a little bit more UK orientated. Now, as I said earlier, ACCA perhaps sits across all the different areas of business the most. You do get students in practice studying ACCA, so working for accountancy firms like Deloitte. You do get students in industry following ACCA, so students in the likes of British Sugar, and also students in the public sector, either working for local councils or working for the NHS. So ACCA in some respects is the most varied qualification in terms of where its students may work, both in terms of industry they work in and in terms of the countries they may work in. To become an ACCA qualified accountant, again, a bit like with CIMA, you've got exams to pass, plus you need the same sort of 3 years worth of total work experience. And again, you can count actually up to 3 years worth of experience you might have had as AAT, again assuming it meets the criterion of the ACCA, so you might actually be able to backdate some of the work you've already been doing in leading up to AAT level 4. Again, you've got the web address there if you want to get more information specifically from the ACCA's website. You find all of the institutes obviously are quite keen to try and get new students to study with them, and so they've all got areas for prospective students. You can download brochures, download lots of information about how the qualifications work, although you're always more than welcome to get in touch with me. I've got quite a lot of experience of training students from all sorts of different institutes over the last few years. Well, let's have a look at the ACCA exam structure. Now, it's not planning a major change at the moment, although you do tend to find most of the professional bodies do change what they're doing every few years. So bear in mind, I'm recording this kind of May 2014. It's likely this will change as time progresses. But you've got 4 basic levels. You've got the knowledge level, which is some computer-based exams, again, kind of multiple choice style exams, 3 papers at the knowledge level. You've then got 6 more conventional paper-based exams at the skills level. You've then got 5 exams in total at the professional level, because it's broken into 3 compulsory papers, which all students must do, and then a couple of optional papers. You do 2 from 4. Little bit like with AAT at level 4, you've got some optional papers where you get to make a choice, so you can specialise, for instance, in tax, or you can specialise, for instance, in audit. The exams for ACCA, again a bit like with CIMA, are currently held twice a year in June and December, although the ACCA, a bit like what CIMA has now announced, they are talking about moving to more sittings a year. They're looking at doing 4 sittings a year at some point in the next couple of years. They're also looking at computerising some of their exams, which may well lead us to on-demand exams, which could make it a lot more flexible. And being AAT qualified, a bit like with CIMA, actually gives you exemptions from the first level. So you'd actually get exempt from the knowledge level of ACCA if you've got your full level 4 AAT. Now, whilst that looks like you're only getting an exemption from 3 papers, and CIMA gives you an exemption from 5 papers at their certificate level, I would probably argue, and I've taught these papers personally, both for ACCA and CIMA, I would argue that the 3 ACCA papers are probably roughly equal to the 5 papers for CIMA. The ACCA papers are each slightly bigger than what you would see at CIMA, so I certainly wouldn't try and make a decision based on the fact that CIMA might give you an extra couple of exemptions. I don't think really that's particularly important. Both those levels, the certificate for CIMA and the knowledge level for ACCA, both of them would take about 6 months to complete, so I don't think it would make a huge amount of difference. most students, as they go through ACCA, would tend to sit a couple of papers at a time, which would tend to be true of CIMA as well, normally sitting about every 6 months in June and December. So your likely duration, possibly a little bit longer than CIMA might take, particularly under the new syllabus, as we've said. CIMA could be done probably within a year. ACCA more likely to take 2.5, probably maybe even 3 years, depending on how you stagger the different exams that you've got. But equally, that may well change. The ACCA have been talking about computerising their exams for a year or two now, and they're talking about going to 4 sittings a year, so that might make it possible to get through ACCA a lot quicker. Well, let's move on to the next qualification, which is Chartered Accountancy, the ICAEW, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, or sometimes also referred to as ACA. ACA means Chartered Accountants, so don't get confused if you see a couple of different terms there. Now, whilst the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales is predominantly a UK qualification, you can imagine it's predominantly followed in England and Wales, it is valued around the world, and in fact Chartered Accountants do move around the whole globe. They do move into different areas. They work in business, they work in practice, they work in public sector. Now, that's when members have qualified, so typically you might qualify as an accountant within practice and then move into industry. So most people studying it will probably work in practice. So most people doing chartered accountancy would work for a large accountancy firm, such as Deloitte, for instance, but then they may move into other areas. They move into business. They might go and become the finance director of a large company. But although most students work in practice, it's starting to become more and more popular outside practice. The Institute has been making big moves to see students working in industry as well. So it's becoming more and more common. You do need to make sure you're working for an authorised employer with chartered accountancy. With CIMA or ACCA, that's less of a concern. You can kind of work for any business as long as you're in a finance role. But with chartered accountancy, you have to work for an employer that is authorised by the institute themselves. So that's worth checking when you're potentially looking at jobs. To become a qualified accountant, a bit like with the other two we've talked about, we need to pass a load of exams and get about 36 months worth of work experience, so about 3 years. Now in the case of chartered, you can count up to 12 months of experience as AAT, although it needs to have been while working for an authorised employer. So if you work for a practice firm, for instance, that is an authorised chartered employer, and you're doing your AAT qualification, you will be able to count up to 12 months of that towards your 3 years, particularly if you move on to chartered with the same employer. That's becoming increasingly common. A lot of chartered employers are increasingly turning to AAT as an alternative to graduates, so they often have a kind of fast-track program where you might spend 2 or 3 years doing your AAT and then move on and do maybe another couple of years doing your chartered qualification. Again, there's the web address if you want any more detail about the chartered qualification themselves. You can have a look at what they say on their website. Well, let's now look at chartered accountancy's exam structure. So they have 6 certificate level computer-based assessments, so actually fairly similar to the way both CIMA and ACCA start. They all have some computer-based exams at the beginning. Now these are on demand, so they can be sat as and when you're ready for them. So some students will rattle through them in a matter of a few weeks, some will spread it out over more like a year. Now as an AAT qualified accountant, you actually get exemptions from some of the certificate level papers, so watch out for this. With CIMA and ACCA you get exemptions from the entire first level. With chartered, well, all AAT students will get exempt from 3 papers, so all AAT students will be exempt from accounting, management information and business and finance. The other exemptions depend on the optional papers that you took at level 4, so it's actually worth, if you're planning to do chartered accountancy, it's worth thinking in advance about which optional papers you will do. If you've done external auditing at level 4, you get exempt from the assurance certificate level paper, and if you've done both optional tax papers, so both personal tax and business tax, you'll be exempt from the principles of tax paper. Now for that reason, I sometimes get students at level 4 who will actually choose to do 3 optional papers rather than just the 2 you're required to do. Sometimes they'll do external auditing and both tax papers because they figure that, yeah, they're doing an extra AAT paper, but that's probably going to be easier in the long run than doing a chartered paper. So that's worth considering at level 4 if you are planning to move into chartered, particularly if you're working for an approved chartered training firm. But you will definitely still have 1 paper at the certificate level. There's a law paper which you never get an exemption from regardless of which AAT papers, but it may be that you actually only have 1 or 2 of those certificate level papers due, and they can be done whenever, so they're quite easy to knock off when is suitable. There are then 6 professional level exams. Most students will sit them a couple at a time. Now, there are actually 4 exam sittings a year, March, June, September and December, although what you tend to find is that a lot of students maybe use the June and December sittings, so they might do a couple of papers at June, a couple of papers at December, maybe another couple at the following June. So to get through those 6 papers might take about 18 months, although there's no reason why you can't do it quicker if you're motivated. You then get the advanced level, 3 advanced level exams, only 2 sittings a year for these ones. These are in July and November, and they can be broken down so you don't have to sit all 3 at the same time. You could do 1 at a time, although a lot of students might do 2 at a time and then the final on its own, although quite a few students even do all 3 at a time. It's a decision you can make when you get to that level, maybe seeing how well you got through the early papers. That's chartered accountancy, probably a likely duration of something in the region of 2 to 2.5 years on top of what you might have done with your AAT qualification. Now, I've talked through what are probably the most common qualifications in the UK. We've got CIMA, ACCA and ICAEW. I'll just talk briefly through some of the other qualifications you might come across and maybe considering. Again, go to their websites if you want specific detail. But the next one we've got is another Chartered Accountants Institute, which is ICAS. So as well as the ICAEW in England and Wales, you've got ICAS in Scotland, and in fact ICAS are actually the oldest accountancy body. Now, a bit like with ICAEW, this is primarily studied by employees in practice. You do get some people working in industry following ICAS, but it's predominantly people working for accountancy firms. However, once people have qualified, the members themselves will work. Well, they'll often stay in practice, but often they'll move into business and might become finance directors, even chief executives of large businesses. One thing that's worth being aware of is whichever accountancy qualification you pursue, they're a great way to set you up for a longer-term career in management of businesses. You can imagine that chief executives and managing directors, it's very important that they've got a grasp of finances in the businesses that they run. A bit like with ICAEW, if you want to train with ICAS, you need to work for an authorised employer, somebody who's actually registered with ICAS themselves, to ensure that as well as the exams you're getting the relevant experience. And for ICAS, you basically need 450 days of relevant work experience as well as having passed the exams. Got the web address there if you want to find out a bit more information. Let's just look briefly at the ICAS exam system. Basically 3 stages that you follow. You've got the test of competence, which currently or has been 5 exams but has recently been moved up to 6 exams. You've got the test of professional skills, which are 4 papers, and the test of professional expertise, which is a single case study paper right at the top of the qualification. Now again, being AAT qualified will give you some exemptions. You'd actually get exemptions from 2 papers at the test of competence level, financial accounting and business management, so you would still have to do perhaps 3 or 4 of those papers at the first level. And with those exemptions, it's likely that the overall duration for doing ICAS might be 2.5, possibly even 3 years that you'd be working through. Well, what if we now consider one of the tax qualifications, the Association of Tax Technicians, or ATT. Now, you can imagine AAT is an accounting technician qualification. This is now a tax technician qualification, basically designed for those employed in tax compliance. So this is the lower level tax qualification, really focuses on getting the calculations right, focuses on the specific processes that are used within the tax function of an organisation. Again, to become an ATT qualified tax accountant, you've got to pass some exams, and in this case get 2 years worth of relevant experience, 24 months worth, and obviously that experience would have to be in a more specifically tax area than some of the accountancy qualifications. Again, you've got a web address there that you can use. In terms of the exam system for ATT, well, there are 2 compulsory papers that all students have to do. Paper 1 on personal tax, paper 2 on business tax, and you then have to do a 3rd paper, which is a choice paper out of 4 alternatives, so you can specialise, you can see there, in things like inheritance tax or VAT. So you've got 3 specific tax exams that you sit, plus you've got a law and ethics e-assessment. Well, there's 2 separate ones there, a law e-assessment and an ethics e-assessment that you have to pass. Now, in terms of the exams themselves, those e-assessments are on demand, like so many of these are. But in terms of the actual exams, 2 sittings a year in May and November. Students would probably complete their 3 exams over 2 sittings, so it's likely that they may complete the exams within 12 months. And it's worth being aware, as an AAT qualified accountant, if you did the business tax optional paper at level 4, you get an exemption from paper 2. But notice, you do not get an exemption from paper 1 if you did the personal tax paper. The AAT personal tax paper is not considered to cover enough ground to give you that exemption. Now, obviously, you will have seen a lot of the material already, so you will have a good head start with paper 1, but note, you do not get the exemption. So if you're thinking about moving to ATT, you might consider which of the tax options would be most appropriate. Although, to be honest, if you're going to move into ATT, I suspect you'd be doing both of the tax options anyway, but it's worth making sure that if you do business tax, you're therefore going to get that exemption. Well, if AAT is the lower level tax qualification, the tax technician qualification, we've then got the Chartered Institute of Tax, which is the CTA exams. Now, this is the leading professional body for tax advisors, so it's much more specifically focusing on a higher level advisory role. Remember, ATT is more just about compliance or doing the calculations. This is more about advice. This very much is the highest level qualification for tax you can do in the UK. And a bit like some of the other qualifications, you've got exams you need to pass, plus 3 years worth of relevant work experience, 36 months worth of relevant work experience. Now, it's worth being aware, if you are planning to move into CTA, if you do want to become a tax advisor in your career, AAT alone is not sufficient to get into CTA. AAT does not meet the CTA's entry requirements. So typically, you'd also then need to go on to one of the other qualifications we've talked about. So you might, for instance, go from AAT to ATT, and then on to CTA, or equally from AAT to ACCA, or Chartered maybe, and then on to CTA. So you could end up with quite a number of different qualifications. Worth being aware, actually, that recently the CTA have started a joint programme with the ICAEW, with the Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, which actually allows students to actually achieve both the CTA qualification and the Chartered qualification at the same time. Which would allow you to actually very rapidly move to a position where you've got some very solid qualifications under your belt. Well, again, website there that you can use to get some more information. And if we just talk briefly about the exam structure, so with CTA, you basically study 5 topics in total in your exams, 3 of which are covered at what's called the awareness exam. Now, as the name might suggest, that's only really at an awareness level, so they're not going to examine you in a huge amount of depth, but 3 models are covered in a single exam. The other 2 topics you're going to then look at in a lot more depth and detail, and these are examined in 2 separate advisory exams. So in fact, can you see you get 3 exams in total covering the technical areas, 1 exam that does 3 modules, and then 2 separate exams for a module each. And you then get a separate case study paper. You actually have to pass 4 exams in total, the awareness exam, 2 advisory exams, and the case study paper. The exams for CTA, a bit like with ATT, are in May and November. Most students would probably take around about 18 months to cover the entire qualification, possibly even longer. Remember, the CTA qualification is a very challenging and demanding qualification. And remember, AAT isn't enough to even get you into CTA, let alone get you any exemptions. But if you were to move on to the likes of ACCA or Chartered after your AAT, if you're qualified with either of those two bodies, then you may well get exemptions when you move to CTA. So you can actually almost start planning out your studies over the next 7 or 8 years, possibly through AAT onto something like Chartered, maybe onto something like CTA. Well, the final qualification I'm going to talk about is CIPFA, which is looking at the public finance accountancy qualification. Well, as the name hopefully suggests, this is very relevant in public services, very often used in the public sector for people working in the likes of the NHS, local councils, county councils and the like. And although it's very relevant to the public sector, the skills required would also be in demand in the private sector. So you often find that people will move out of the public sector into industry. In order to become a CIPFA member, you need to pass exams and get 400 days of relevant work experience, although if you're an AAT member, they do actually reduce that to 200 days to give you some credit for what you would already have done while doing your AAT qualification. You've got then the web address to have a look at if you want to find out more about CIPFA. But if we talk briefly about their exam structure, so we've got the professional certificate stage, which is 4 exams, the professional diploma stage, which is 6 exams, and then 2 exams at the strategic level. As an AAT student, you would receive exemptions from some of those papers. You'd get financial accounting and management accounting. They'd be exemptions at the professional certificate stage, so you'd actually end up only doing a couple of exams at that first stage. You can imagine in your AAT studies you see a lot of financial accounting and a lot of management accounting, and you'd also get exempt from half of one of the diploma stage modules, because one of the diploma stage modules actually has 2 bits to it, half of which is tax, and if you've completed both optional tax papers, then you will get that half module exemption, so you effectively only have to sit a half paper. Now, with those exemptions, likely duration for CIPFA probably in the region of a couple of years in total, although it can actually be done a bit quicker than that. Well, hopefully I've given you a little bit of food for thought there. Now, like I said, it's just designed to be a very brief introduction to the different qualifications you might come across. Obviously, you've got the addresses for the different institutes' websites if you want to find out more information. Look at what they've got on their websites. Do phone them up and ask if you want a bit more detail. But equally, you're more than welcome to get in touch with me if you'd like to. So garethjohn@fi.co.uk, or equally follow me on Twitter, AAT Top Tutor. And I do regularly post a variety of things on Twitter that you might find useful. But thanks for your attention. I hope you found that useful.